December 18th, 1972. 30,000 feet over Hanoi. The cockpit lights are dimmed to red. The electronic warfare officer watches a field of phosphorescent needles bloom on his scope. Fan song search spikes. Then the thicker bar of acquisition. Then the steady spear of track. He calls the distance, and bearing in a calm he does not feel. Outside, the night is streaked with exhaust plumes that rise from paddies and marshes like white spears. The first SA-2 climbs straight, then tips, then comes hunting. Somewhere ahead, the lead B-52 cell is crossing the initial point. Behind, another cell is already timing the bomb run. Far below, the rail yards at Yin Vien and Gia Lam are lit with their own small constellation of work lights and muzzle flashes. A minute ago, people down there believed the heavy bombers that American pilots called buffs, big ugly fat fellows, could not survive the defenses around Hanoi. In the next 11 nights, those people will learn they were wrong. Strategic Air Command will fly 729 B-52 sorties, drop roughly 15,000 tons of bombs, and absorb the loss of 15 Stratofortresses. North Vietnam will fire about 1,240 SA-2 Guideline missiles trying to stop them. The wall of missiles will hold until it doesn't. Chapter 1. The city that believed it was safe. For years, Hanoi and Haiphong had been wrapped in the densest integrated air defense system on Earth. Radar pickets ranging from hand-crank sets to Soviet P-12 and P-35 early warning radars. Fan-song fire control radars. MiG-17 and MiG-21 on strip alert. And an umbrella of anti-aircraft artillery that thickened as one flew closer to the capital. The hard edge was the SA-2 Guideline, a two-stage missile that could sprint to nearly Mach 3.5, lift a 440-pound fragmentation warhead to the stratosphere, and detonate by command or proximity. Batteries moved, decoyed, and reloaded at speed. The system was designed to punish patterns, to learn altitudes, arrival times, post-target turns, and then to solve the problem the way an abacus solves arithmetic. The United States had tried to break Hanoi before. Rolling Thunder, 1965 to 1968, had been a long attritional campaign run with political brakes on. What stopped in the spring of 1968 left the rail lines, pipelines, and power of the Red River alive behind a parapet of concrete and discipline. 4 years later, in October 1972, Chief Negotiator Henry Kissinger told the press he believed peace is at hand. Weeks later, the talks unraveled. In the final days of December, President Richard Nixon ordered a short, brutal demonstration of sustained, massed air power, one designed to break the defensive network, crack the rail nodes that fed it, and compel a return to Paris. The codename, Operation Linebacker II. Chapter 2. The B-52 Stratofortress had been born to carry gravity weapons at intercontinental ranges, not to thread a SAM belt over a capital city. But like the P-47 of another war, it contained a paradox. Size and strength that, properly applied, became survival. The B-52D Big Belly modification, built for Vietnam, turned the airplane into a conventional sledgehammer. Up to 84 times 500-pound bombs, or 42 times 750-pound bombs internally, plus external racks, for a conventional load of roughly 60,000 pounds. In a 3-ship cell, 3 bomb patterns laid seconds apart could grid an entire rail yard into wreckage. The dumber the bombs, the more you needed altitude stability and timing discipline. stratified 500-foot altitude separations, and mile-in-trail spacing kept patterns tight while allowing the jammers to overlap. The Buffs flew from Anderson AFB, Guam, on 12 to 18-hour round trips, and from Utapao, Thailand, on shorter cycles that let them turn multiple times a week. They came at night, because at night the missile crews had to fight the bombers by instrument, and because the BUFF was an airplane that turned the darkness to its own purposes. It was not just mass, it was electronics. The bombers carried ECM suites that poured noise into the radar picture. EB-66 and EA-6 aircraft added escort jamming, F-105G Wild Weasels, and F-4 Hunters prowled for radars that lit up. KC-135 tankers kept everybody fed. F-111S hit airfields and SAM sites at night. A raid package was not a stream of airplanes. It was a system of systems, and if you touched any part of it, the part touched you back. Chapter 3. Maximum Effort. Night 1. 18. December 1972. The strike plan called for 3 night waves. 129 B-52s launched, some from Guam, some from Thailand. The opening attacks smashed airfields and storage depots. The second and third waves went for rail nodes and SAM support sites around Hanoi and Haiphong. The missiles rose in volleys. 3 B-52s were lost the first night to SA-2s. It was a shock, but not a surprise. Everyone had read the briefings. Everyone understood that the safest place for a B-52 in a SAM belt was strangely on the bomb run, where tight formation, stable airspeed, and a wall of noise from multiple jammers held the radar picture together. The deadly seconds were after bomb release, when a cell executed the standard hard turn, when altitude and direction briefly became predictable. The television pictures across the world showed orange blossoms blooming on the edge of the city. Inside the Hanoi Hilton, American POWs felt the walls vibrate and traded looks that needed no words. For the first time in years, they were hearing the specific thunder of their own country's heavy bombers. Chapter 4. The Worst Night. A Pattern Solved. 20 December became the hinge. SAC planning had kept routes, altitudes, and post-target turns predictable to reduce crew error. Predictability is mercy for the enemy. SAM operators learned the pattern and solved the geometry. 6 B-52s were shot down that night, most as they executed the turn-off target. The loss rate was unsustainable. Crews came home with holes in the wings and shrapnel in the pressure hulls. Some did not come home at all. The next day, the tactics changed. Routes diversified. Altitudes varied. Post-target turns altered. ECM stacks were relayered. Chaff corridors were moved. When the pattern went away, so did the sudden spike in attrition. The lesson was as old as air power and as new as the radar scope. Do not be predictable to a defender whose weapon thrives on prediction. Chapter 5. How a Buff Survives. Downtown. The cockpit drill was mechanical and human at once. Pilot, hold airspeed and heading on the run, because the bomb pattern will not forgive your improvisation. Co-pilot, share the scan, back up the instruments, monitor the engines for the first hint of temperature or vibration that could compromise thrust at the worst time. Navigator and radar. Navigator, make the time over target window strip so tight that the formation becomes a single instrument. Electronic warfare. Officer, ride the scope, identify the radars, manage the jammers, call SAM uplinks and burn-throughs without hurry or panic. Tail gunner, once a talisman in Cold War doctrine, now a second pair of eyes and a last layer of defense. On the 24th of December, in a moment that belongs to the footnotes and the legends both, a 1C Albert E. Moore, tailgunner of Buff Diamond Lil, scored a MiG-21 kill, one of only 2 confirmed B-52 tailgun victories in the war. Another gunner in the formation saw the MiG trailing fire and dropping away. In a bombing campaign about endurance and systems, for a second, there was also the old picture of a man with a gun at the back end of an airplane and the enemy falling behind him. Chapter 6. Boxing Day. There was a stand down on Christmas Day, then a return to the capital on the 26th of December, Boxing Day, with the largest mass of the campaign. By then, the changes in routing and altitudes, the restacked jammers, and the sheer exhaustion of the defenders were showing. 2 B-52s were lost that night, a terrible number to the people who flew them, and a very different number to the people who had survived the 20th. Tracks widened to pull the missile operators in different directions. F-11-1s and Wild Weasels were making the surface-to-air threat spend itself in blind volleys. MiG activity, never as effective against the Buffs as the SAMs, was rare and costly. The rail system north and east of Hanoi began to look like a toy dropped and stepped on. Rails were lifted out of the ties by the blast of 500-pounders. Locomotives lay on their sides like dead whales. Pole petroleum farms burned. Transformers blew in rows of white light. SAM support depots took their own medicine. The day fighters, Air Force, Navy, Marine, spent the light hours cutting the smaller arteries the bomb lines had missed the night before. Chapter 7. The Math. When the last Buffs shut down on 29th of December, the numbers looked like this. B-52 sorties, 729 flown out of 741 planned. Tonnage, about 15,000 tons dropped by the Buffs, thousands more by tactical aircraft. SAMs fired, approximately 1,240. B-52 losses, 15. Losses of other types brought the total U.S. aircraft lost during the campaign to 26 across 12 days and nights. Numbers cannot capture the human part. Of the crew members from downed B-52s, some were rescued by Sandy A-1s and Jolly Green helicopters. Others were captured and would return when the war's clocks ran down. Others died under parachutes that did not open or in wreckage that did not float. Inside Hanoi and Haiphong, civilians died in the thousands according to local counts. A tragedy that lives within every serious history of the air war, while military stocks and lines of communication were cut and burned. War by Heavy Bomber writes a ledger in Math and Grief. Chapter 8. Why the reversal happened. The reversal, the Buffs can't survive downtown, becoming they can, and they will keep coming until the job is done, was made from 4 things. Mass. The United States could generate dozens of heavy bombers, night after night, because the logistics existed to do so. Anderson and U. Tapao had ground crews who could swap engines, patch skin, change tires, and reload thousands of 500-pounders with choreography. KC-135 fleets could make fuel discipline an art. The command post at SA-2 off at AFB could replan routes across the Pacific with pencil, greaseboard, and a general's impatience. Payload. The big belly conversions mattered. A single B-52D could drop the equivalent of 9 World War II B-17s in one pass. In a 3-ship cell, the blast loads overlapped, pulled rails from ties, cratered yards, collapsed sheds, and turned POL tanks into firestorms. The buff was not about elegance. It was about coverage. ECM and SEAD. The BUFF did not go to Hanoi alone. EB-66 and EA-6 aircraft fogged the picture. Wild weasels stabbed at radars when they lit. Chaff corridors redrew the map. F-111s pulled the teeth from airfields. The defenders had to make choices, and when they chose wrong, they wasted missiles. And attention they could not afford to waste. Adaptation. The night of the 20th of December showed the price of predictability. The nights after showed the dividend of change. Varying routes, altitudes, and post-target turns was not poetry. It was survival. Losses fell as quickly as they had spiked. Chapter 9. The 11 Nights, seen from inside. It is easy to speak of radar sets and missile envelopes. Harder to convey what it felt like to be a crew of 6 in a steel tube at 35,000 feet, while a Mach 3 missile lifted toward you from a city ringed with fire. A B-52 on the run gave the crew too much to do and not enough to do, both at once. Every hand on an instrument, every eye on a portion of a sky that could not be seen. The airplane shook when the bombs came off. The pilot rode the trim uphill. The EW called the uplinks. The radar navigator did the mental arithmetic of speed and wind and distance to turn the bomb pattern into a picture that would fit the target. A cell's survival was mutual. The overlapping noise jamming made 3 airplanes safer than 1. The nightmare was an orphaned ship, out of position, separated by turbulence or error. When a B-52 exploded in a white flash under a missile's proximity fuse, crews behind it flew through a shrapnel cloud that rang on aluminum like hail on a roof. When a ship took a hit and held together, the crew became a chorus of checklists: fire, fuel, hydraulics, electrics, while the formation, if it could, closed a little around the wound. There were moments of dark comedy because human beings generate them to keep the world tolerable. Pilots muttered about flying a freight train. EWOs spoke of Sam farms. Maintenance chiefs argued that they could smell a burned ECM pallet from 30 feet. Guam crews joked about leaving and arriving in the same calendar day after 20 hours in a pressurized office. But behind those jokes sat a ledger, and each blank line on the squadron board was a person who was not coming back to the tent. Chapter 10. The Daylight Picture. While the buffs worked the night, the day fighters, F-4s, A-7s, A-6s, A-1s, and others, cut power lines, road bridges, and ferries. The rhythm became clockwork. At night, the heavy blows. By day, the knife work that ensured the rail system stayed down. After 11 days, the Air Force estimated 500 rail interdictions, 372 pieces of rolling stock destroyed, and millions of gallons of fuel burned. If you got on a bicycle to take a sack of rice from Haiphong to Puli, you might make it. If you tried to move diesel and ammunition by railroad, the BUFFs took an interest. Chapter 11. The Politics of Shock. Historians argue about what Linebacker II accomplished. The record is clear on the sequence. Hanoi signaled a willingness to resume talks. Negotiations restarted on the 8th of January 1973. The Paris Peace Accords were signed on the 27th of January. American POWs began returning in Operation Homecoming weeks later. Whether the BUFFs forced the decision or accelerated one already forming will remain a seminar argument. What is not in dispute is that the campaign demonstrated that massed heavy bombers, properly protected and operated with tactical flexibility, could survive downtown and do so for as long as the planners chose. Chapter 12, The Last Massed Raid, 29th of December, 1972. The final night. The Buffs cut the last rail spurs into Langjung and Thai Nguyen. The MiG strips stay dark. The SAMs still launch, but in thin volleys, with fewer burn-throughs and more wild tracks that end in cold air. In squadron tents and ready rooms across Guam and Thailand, crews wait for the last phone calls out of search and rescue. The calls do not come. Somebody writes on a board with a felt pen, "No losses." The next message is shorter. Stand down. In January, talks resume. In late January, they end. The POWs come home under cameras and winter sun. The Buffs go back to oceans and deserts and schedules that look like boredom, but are actually patience. They will fly on into other decades, other wars, other technologies. But for 11 December nights, a heavy bomber built for a different apocalypse came to a city that believed its missiles made it safe and proved that walls, once mapped and varied against, are problems, not destinies. This concludes our story of the 11 December nights, when a city ringed with missiles discovered that mass, electronics, and adaptation could bend the arc of a war. If this deep dive taught you something, or changed how you think about the B-52, Linebacker II, or air power, please like the video, share it with a friend who loves aviation history, and subscribe so you don't miss the next long form. Thanks for watching, for thinking critically, and for keeping history alive. See you in the next one.